Hey Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing pretty good. As I was mentioning, I have a bit of an issue with my calling game, I think. So I was wondering if today you can help me a little bit playing from the big blind. I can set this up so that I have playable hands, but I really never know if I'm calling too wide or not, and so I'd love your input on it. And so maybe you can give me your thoughts, and then we'll play a few hands.
Okay, and what kind of hands are you struggling with in general, or any in particular, like suited aces or pairs? Where are you having your problem out of the big blind?
I think my problem out of the big blind, or my problem calling in general, which happens to be likely mostly on the big blind, is um, top pair, weak kicker. Do I take it all the way to the river? What to do with the middle pair? When do you give it up? And it's also those more complicated ones in my mind where you have good equity but you don't have a pair. So a gut shot with a backdoor straight flush with a backdoor flush or something like that is always. I never know if I'm pushing it too far, and so results don't matter. But then they do when you see the result, and then you don't know if you played this well or not. And so I'm always sort of kicking myself or not knowing if I did it the right way.
Got it. Okay. Well, kind of, just some background on big blind play. First of all, you're going to lose money out of the big blind. If you look at any winning player's statistics, by position, they are losing money out of the big blind. It's
Hmm.
just the nature of the position, and it's there's two factors for that. One of them is real and you can't do anything about, and the other one is you have no you have more control over. The one you can't do anything about is the fact that you're going to be out of position. Um, you're going to you're in position. You're in the last act pre-flop, but then post-flop you're out of position, and I know we all know how important position is, but nobody really believes it, especially when they say they're getting a good price out of the big blind and they want to call and see a flop. They've got a suited ace or something like that, and that brings me to the thing that you can control, and that is, or the thing that's more in your under your control, and that is recognizing the price you're getting, and that it's got to be really offset by that first factor, which is the
Hmm.
position. So
Yep.
this is a trap that a lot of players get into. They feel they're priced in. They feel they have to quote unquote defend their big blind, and so the first step to minimizing how much you lose in the big blind, because you are going to lose money there, but the first step in minimizing how much you lose out of the big blind is just not playing cards from that position, not getting sucked into this idea that you're priced in or that you want to see a flop. Um, you're getting 2 to 1 or three, good price on your money, and so you're going to play it. Um, that's the first step, and
Okay.
then the second step, when you once you decide to play your hand, the my general rule is I'm kind of an aggression freak. My first inclination is to fold a hand out of the big blind, but if I'm going to play it, more often than not, probably 70% or higher of the time, I'm going to come back with a re-raise. I'm going to establish this feeling that in my opponent, that I have a very strong hand, that I am re-raising for a reason. So he's not going to see me play very many hands out of the big blind, but when he does, he's going to see me re-raise, and that's even with my weak trappish hands that I probably shouldn't play, but I decide to anyway.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
so aggression really matters. It increases your fold equity post
Yeah.
flop because your opponent has to put you on a stronger hand than if you just call. Um, and so that's sort of the next sort of thing I do. And if I am going to call, it's going to, if I decide that, for whatever reason, I want to see a flop. I have a small pair that can't withstand a four bet from the opponent. I do want to see a flop because I think I'm getting good implied odds or something like that. Um, then it's pretty rare, and I might do that with I in fact I do this occasionally with super strong hands like even aces. If I get re-raised uh, from middle, or if somebody opens from the small blind, for example, and I've got aces in the big blind, Occasionally, maybe 10 or 15% of the time, I'm just going to smooth call there because it's very deceptive. And I'm also going to do that with hands like pocket deuces or 7-8 suited or something like that, so that when we do get to showdown, my opponent has no idea what I've got, and it's going to also put the fear of God into him, so that when I do call, he doesn't know whether I've got that monster hand or if I'm calling with something speculative. So my default is, I guess to summarize, my default is to fold the majority of times because the positional disadvantage is so great that I need a really good hand to call. So fold is number one. Then if I do decide to play my hand, 70, maybe 3 out of 4 times, I'm going to re-raise. 70%, 80% of the time, I'm going to re-raise. So I think that's the first lesson. And
Interesting.
the first point. And then when we get post-flop, you're obviously out of position, and you're going to have to look at things like board texture and where what your opponent's position is, and therefore what is his range and how does that connect with the board or not. But the first battle is pre-flop.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a bit more how I think about small blind, what you're describing, but
Okay.
that I like the aggression component. Let's maybe jump into a few hands and see how we do.
Okay, so we're on advanced poker training, and you've got it set up to
Play from the big blind only with playable hands, so we don't have to fold too much, even though that's not how obviously it's going to happen in real life.
Got it. Okay.
All right. Just starting. Well, so nothing happened on my first hand. That's good. All right, so what is that? The cutoff raises, the button calls, and I'm sat in the big blind with ace-2. I want to fold this hand.
Yeah, you're getting what looks like a great price, right? There's $15 in the pot,
Yep.
I think, right? And it's going to cost you $4 to see the pot, so you're getting nearly 4-1 on your money. But a suited ace or an unsuited ace, small ace like this, is a trap hand, and it's the positional disadvantage. If you hit an ace here and then get action, you're almost certainly
You're probably
beat.
wrong.
So
Yeah, you probably don't. Yep.
this is one of those reverse implied odd hands that just will kill you. So yeah, a fold is a good
right.
move here.
Let's fold it. Next hand, pair of threes in the big blind and the cutoff raised.
Yep. Now the classic answer here is to you're getting another relatively good odds here is deep stacked. So you could argue that you're getting good implied odds because the effective stack size relative to the amount that you're going to call. Bill Gates wants you to upgrade.
Yes,
Okay.
apparently.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So a lot of people would argue, and for beginners, I would say you can call here and try to hit a set. The problem is that you've been raised by a late position raiser, and his range is very wide. So the actual implied odds you're getting, setting the math aside for a minute, the ratio of effective stack size to how much it takes for you to call, putting the math aside for a minute, just thinking about the psychology of this player and what kind of cards he has in his range. You're not getting great implied odds because he can have a very wide range here. Some of them, yes, are things like aces and kings and big pairs and big aces and things like that. That might pay you off if you hit your set and he hits his hand. But the vast majority of hands that he's hit here are not strong, and he won't pay you off. So you extra deep stack implied odds against late position raisers. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so again, my default is if I want to play this hand, and I think this is a playable hand here, no doubt, I'm going to default to the aggression, and I'm going to re-raise to something that's going to put, maybe if you hit the pot button here, for example, I'm not sure how this program's set up to define that. So that's maybe a little bit too much, so we might dial it back down to like, $15 or something. Yeah. And come back over the top with him. If he smooth calls here, you're still getting pretty good implied odds. If he re-raises you, we can think about this.
Yep. All right, let's do it.
Where we're at.
Yep. The advisor says he would call. I will use my own action. All right.
And you got to fold. So what you've done is you've won a hand there. Most likely you're going to lose because you're going to miss the set.
You're not going to get the set.
You're going to miss the set. And even those times you do hit it, as I said, he's probably not going to pay you off. So what we've done is we've just increased our expected value by, remember, there's two ways to win a hand, right? You can show down the best hand, in this case, hit a set and show it down, or get the guy to fold. If you're just calling, you're foregoing that entire second, that ladder method completely. You're saying, I'm just going to try to hit a hand. Whereas if you raise there like we did, you're adding fold equity into the mix. You're trying, you can win a lot of times by getting the other guy to fold. So again, this is the secret and beauty of aggression, and I think really separates some of the really world-class players from just the so players.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay.
Bit of a similar but different situation. The opener here is under the gun, 6 max. He opens to 8, which is pretty large, and we're sat in the big blind with a pair of 2s, which doesn't really make me want to call for sure. So the question becomes then either raise or go away.
No, from my point of view, this is actually a situation where I think calling actually might make more sense. And the reason for that is look at the position of the opener here, this Juan Martez.
Yeah.
If you don't know anything else about a player, my default is to assume that he's opening, my opponent is opening the same hands that I myself would open from his seat in this situation. So what kind of hands are you opening from under the gun in a 6 max game like this?
Pairs 5 and above, ace queen plus, Broadway suited, and suited connectors. Some
big suited connectors, probably.
Yep.
So what this means is that he's got a relatively strong hand. Comparing it to the hand we just played against this Carlos Castro player who opened in late position, where his range is very wide, Juan Martez's range is much narrower, meaning it's strong, which means that your implied odds.
Yeah,
yes, he's more likely to pay you off if you hit. He's also less likely to fold to a re-raise here because he's got such a strong opening range. So re-raising here, your fold equity
goes
part
down.
Of your equity that's related to folding out his hands is greatly diminished. And in fact, the only hands he's going to fold here are the weakest part of his range, which represents a relatively small fraction. So in this particular case, I think calling makes more sense. You're both very deep stacked. It's $6 to call. There's 192 divided by 6. You're getting quite a bit of
30 plus.
Yep. So call here and try to hit a set, and you whiffed. But before we act, think about this board texture relative to his range.
It's not great for him. I mean, he has big cards. He doesn't have that many 6s and 7s and 4s in his range. So unless he had a made pair, he probably has nothing at this point.
Exactly. Now, this is completely player dependent whether you donk into him here or whether you check and maybe check raise or check fold. It really depends upon your read on the player. You don't know much about this player. I'm assuming this missed his texture, or the board texture missed his hand range, as we just said. So actually donking into him is not a crazy idea here, actually. Again, it depends upon the player and his read on you and so on. But, coming out with a 2/3 size pot bet here, $12, $13, something like that.
All right.
Might actually get him to fold, and you're turning your hand into a bluff here.
Let's try it. And he folds.
You get the fold. So
perfect.
Conventional wisdom is, check to the razor, but in that particular case, because of the board texture, it just makes so much sense to say, hey, I think he missed. I can put some pressure on him and just take this, turn my hand into a bluff and take this pot down. So I think that's a pretty high percentage play.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I never really considered donk plays, but now I get it. Thanks.
It's really dependent upon board texture. You've got to look at what the range of your opponent is And again, for lack of a better place to start, just assume that his range is exactly what you're going to play in that same seat, and then apply the board texture to that and say, does this hit that range or not? Oh, it doesn't. He can't continue unless, except for his hands that are over pairs to the board, and
Mm-hmm.
it is a fraction of his range. It is a percentage of his range, but it's not
It's
the
not a big one.
majority of his
Yep.
range. Yeah.
All right, so here, a couple limpers into us in the big blind with ace four suited.
Yep. And so here you don't, it's, I think the conventional wisdom is probably correct, and that is just to check and see a flop. You're not going to hit spades very often. In fact, it's pretty, if you look at the numbers, and I forget the actual probabilities, but it's pretty rare that you're going to hit a flush or a flush draw. So, you're probably going to lose this hand regardless. You're multi-way. If you re-raise here, you might get two of these folks to fold. If you do try to do like a squeeze here out of the big blind. But most likely, this is one of those hands that I think you have to treat this hand no different than you do like, Jack four suited or something like that. You hit an ace and get action. It's probably a better ace than yours. If you hit spades on the board, people see flushes very easily, and you're probably not going to get paid off. So, I think checking is just fine here, and playing. You're not in the small blind completely out of position, but you are second to act multi-way pot. You're going to give up pretty quickly here.
All right, let's try it. And we missed completely.
Yeah, not only did we miss, but talk to me about the board texture here. What does this look like to you? Is it a wet board, dry board, scary board? I mean, what are you thinking when you see this board?
Well, it's a pretty wet board, right? There's two hearts. The 7-8 obviously create a lot of open-ended. Plus, you get the queen on the other side. So even somebody with, 10 jack or 9-10 is already somewhat alive, at least more alive than we are potentially. So all we have is a high card ace. A lot of the people have already declared by not raising that they don't really have big cards. So if it had been ace or queen or king, it may actually have hit them less than a queen. A queen may actually not be. Somebody may just limp with queen 9 or something like that and still hit the queen. So,
okay, so
with 4 players in the pot, somebody else has touched this.
Okay, so talk to me about the first player that open limped. It's hard to see his name there. Gene Yu, I think it is. So what kind of range do you put him on with the open limp from middle position like that?
Small pairs, suited connectors, suited gappers type of a thing. And maybe a random like a king 7 or something bad like that, but suited.
Okay, now tell me how that stacks up, sort of those small and middle pairs and those suited connectors against his equity on this board against you with this ace-4 suited on this board. Do you think he's ahead of your range? You think he's got more pot equity than you? Do you think he's going to go away easily if he's got...
He's not going to go away easily if he has a 7 or an 8. If he has nothing, if he has a pair of 4 or something like that, he's probably going to call at least the first barrel.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to barrel now basically doesn't really give me all that much information. I'd rather actually check and see if he checks rather than stabs at the pot.
Yeah, I totally agree with that analysis. And not only that, but you've got 2 other players. You've got this Stacy Miller on the button, and then the small blind as well that you've got to get past somehow. So I think check folding here is the right play.
All right. So Gene bets 6 into 8 essentially, so a pretty sort of 3/4 of the pot. Probably time to fold.
Yep, absolutely. The other thing to note is, open limpers. Sometimes people are tricky, and sometimes you see advanced players open limping with various hands just to mix up their game a bit. But for the most part, open limpers like this guy are bad players. And one of the hallmarks or tells about players is that their bets mean something, mean exactly what their hand is. So he's here leading into, not leading, I guess 2 of us checked to him, but basically he's firing into this board moderately sized, a little less than half the pot. If no, I'm sorry, he was. What was the pot?
The pot was
into?
8. Yeah.
8. So he's betting
3/4
3/4 of
of
the
a pot.
pot.
Yeah.
As a general rule, bad players, their betting means what they have. So if they check, it usually means they've whiffed. If they bet really small, it means that they don't really like their hand that much. The bigger they bet, the stronger their hand is. Sometimes you'll see people overbet when they're afraid of the board and just want to take it down, which is another fallacy. I think you shouldn't necessarily do in poker.
Right.
But what this tells me that into this pot, 3/4 size pot bet, means he likes the board, it doesn't scare him. So he's got a piece of it, or overcards to it, or he's got some reason that he's staying.
Or he's got a draw, a strong draw.
Exactly.
That's
and he's semi-bluffing. He's got 10-9 of hearts or something. Something. Who knows? But yeah. So I think this is a clear fold.
Cool.
There's just no sense putting any more money in it. You're in the big blind. You're going to lose money in the big blind. This is one of those hands you're just going to lose money in the big blind with. So
no problem.
It's the price of poker.
All right, I'll fold this one. Should we do one last one?
Sounds good.
All right, one limper, the same guy, Gene, with ace-9 offsuits.
Yep. Now, he's limp open twice now, which just confirms to me he's a bad player. So he can have a very wide range here.
Yep.
Anything from any pair, any Broadway, any cards that he considers pretty and shiny.
Yes.
Suited aces, suited kings, often suited queens. It's really hard to tell here. Now the question is, it's hard to bluff bad players, is a general rule of mine. So and what I mean by that is you can only bluff players that are paying attention and are putting you on some kind of hand, and that they think is stronger than yours. This guy is a bad player. Is he bad enough that he can't be bluffed? I don't know. I think the default here for me would be to, again, this is one of those hands that looks pretty, but is not very strong, especially given that you're out of position in the hand. So I think the conventional wisdom is just to check fold here. Check,
Yep.
See a flop. If you whiff, get out. But that said, if we're up against maybe a better player who, for whatever reason, has limped in, but we think he's a good enough player that he can fold, you might raise here. You might just bump it. If he calls, you will almost, depending on board texture, firing a barrel on a continuation bet on the flop might take it down there. So again, I think the proper call for most players, most beginning and even intermediate players here, is just to check, see a flop, and then play it from there. But a more advanced play might be just to re-raise here and see if you can take it down. And something like taking it up to making it $8 or $9, something like that. And so we can try that.
Let's try it.
Try $8, see where we're going. But again, the default play, just for the record, would be to just check and then play post flop. So.
All right. Well, you started by saying hemp up the aggression, so let's do it.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. And we take it down.
And you gotta fold. So aggression is one of the secrets in poker. Now, okay, awesome. Jacks are really tough here, right? This is a really tough one. And we probably should just make this the last hand. But
yep.
So let's talk about this. What's your gut feeling in reading the situation here?
Well, Gene opened, which we know he tends to limp a little bit. So that's already one sign. And then there's two callers at this point. So Jacks if it were only one player, I would re-raise. But now that there are three in the pot, I'm a little less certain about Jacks, right? Because if somebody calls you, there's a high likelihood you get an overcard, and so you never know where you're gonna stand.
Yeah. So a couple of points here is we saw Gene Yu limp the previous two hands, and to me that tells me he's a bad player. And as I said, bad players, their bet sizing tells you a
something.
lot about this. Yep. And now here he is opening relatively large, right? He's betting 3.5 times the size of the big blind is what he's opened with. I think he likes his hand.
Yep.
And so a bad player, what kind of hands do they like? Well, they like big pairs and ace king kind of hands. So big pairs, the majority of them, if we call big pairs like nines and above, aces, kings, and queens have us beat. Jacks we're chopping with, and that's pretty rare because we have 2 of the jacks in our hand. And tens and nines are a smaller fraction. So on average, his hand is a better hand than ours. If we factor in things like ace, king suited and things like that, we're in coin flips with him. So against him alone, re-raising here is not that effective. He's only going to call with the higher end of his range. And we have a strong hand. We don't want somebody with a worse hand than us to fold here.
Yep.
So re-raising doesn't accomplish what doesn't get a worse hand to call or a better hand to fold. So against that player, now the other 2 players, Carlos Castro and then the small blind there, what kind of hands are they calling with? Again. It can be anything from middle and small pairs, suited connectors. They're re-raising with their aces and kings and ace king, so we can rule those out of their range.
Could have ace queen, ace jack, call with that.
Exactly. So here in this situation, I think the right call is it's going to sound weird, but call with the intention of set mining with your jacks.
No, it makes sense because here we get implied odds, right? Because Gene likes his hand, we already know that, and we have 2 other players, and so if we hit, somebody's going to pay us off.
Exactly. So I would try to hit a jack if you can. If we don't, then we go to the board and kind of play the situation. So this is a tough one. We've been checked to. This is a pretty dry board. This is
with an overcard.
The classic dry board that a lot of poker books and videos talk about is king, 7, deuce, rainbow. Well, this is about as close to king, 7, deuce, rainbow as you can get. So this is technically a very dry board. We could easily have the best hand here. The problem that we have is that we're out of position, right? We've got these 2 other players to act. If we raise into Gene here, remember, why are we raising? We want a better hand to fold or a worse hand to call. Is that going to happen if we donk into him here? Probably not, unfortunately. So I think the right play here, if there is a right play, is to check and see what happens and evaluate at that point. Check to the razor and see what happens. And it checks around.
Checks.
We probably have the best hand here. The board just got a fair bit wetter because that 9, it's a spade. So there's backdoor flushes that are at play here. It's connected to the queen and the 7. So somebody with 10-8 now is looking a lot better than they did pre. I think you might want to donk into this and see if we can take it down. But again, it's one of those one and done things. If you bet and we get any kind of action, I think we shut it down.
So bet a little bit on the big side, 21, something like that.
Yeah, typically I like continuation bets and any kind of post flop bet somewhere between 60 and 90% of the pot size.
All right.
What we're trying to do here effectively is get guys who have an A7 or something like that to come along. We want a worse hand to come along.
Us,
Yep. We do want to bet big enough though that we discourage the 10-8 guy who's calling with a straight draw now.
The draw gets priced.
So 3/4 of the bet, 3/4 of the pot is probably about right.
All right.
And the conventional wisdom there. Yep. And there you go.
Well done. All right. Thank you, Mark.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'll talk to you soon.